Greetings, friends. You are on the Ruslan Bailov channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine as of September 13th, 2025. A large number of very interesting events took place today, so let's get started. Well, let's move on to the line of combat contact. And today, of course, the main news, coming for an entire day in a row, is directly from the Zaporizhzhia sector of the front. Once again, we have a large number of geolocations, once again a large number of flags, which tells us that over the past 24 hours, the Russian army has once again managed to make significant advances and improve its positions. Today, information is coming from the settlement of Novomykhailovka. From this sector, Russian units have published video footage confirming that the armed forces of the Russian Federation have fully cleared this settlement. Just yesterday, the map in this area looked like this. Today, we are making the appropriate updates, and overall, we can see that the offensive dynamics here, on the Zaporizhzhia direction, are the highest. Let's once again look at how Russian units, as part of the Vostok group of forces, have advanced since September 3, 2025. Back then, about 10 days ago, the map looked like this, and starting from September 3, the Russian army has been actively advancing, clearing one settlement after another. It really does appear that the armed forces of Ukraine are, overall, unable to put up any meaningful resistance to the Vostok grouping. For a few days, the grouping stalled around the settlement of Turnovo, but by the end of September 12th, the defenses around Turnovo had been broken, and the Ukrainian side began to retreat further. Today we see approximately this kind of map. And of course, the biggest question now is, why isn't Siversk redeploying units here? Why isn't Siversk trying to stabilize the situation? Apparently, the Pokrovsk direction is currently the top priority for the AFU units and for Ukraine's general staff. They are apparently trying first to extinguish the fire around Pokrovsk and Mirnohrad. If the Ukrainian side manages to stabilize things there, then there might be an opportunity to redeploy forces to other sectors of the front, including the Kupiansk and Zaporizhzhia directions. But for now, Siversk still has some time here, maybe a week, maybe two, before the situation becomes truly critical. Looking at the entire Zaporizhzhia and eastern Zaporizhzhia sector, the direction is essentially divided into three areas, larger agglomerations, so to speak. These are not cities, but clusters of villages and towns close to each other. For example, the Huliaipol agglomeration. It's not just a village, but a large settlement with surrounding villages. A bit to the north, Pokrovsk and Oleksandrivska, a cluster of several towns and villages that form a sizable area where the AFU can deploy units. Then there is the Velikomikhailovka agglomeration, a fairly large village which the Russian side has not yet approached. And then two smaller clusters, the Poltavske Okhotnichne area and the Uspanivka fortified zone. On the map they are marked in yellow. These are well-fortified villages and small towns where AFU units are concentrated. Most importantly, these villages provide bases for FPV drone operators. If we analyze the front-line corrections, we can see exactly how the map has been changing and where the Vostok grouping is headed. Based on the trends, if we extend the line of advance, the Russian army is moving in this direction. And to be more precise, the key objective of this phase of the offensive is the village of Verbov. After Verbov, the Russian army will likely face its first real challenges. It's hard to call them problems, since we haven't seen any real resistance from the AFU yet, but it may be the first serious test. Why? Because from this area, the Ukrainian side will be able to strike Russian positions and advancing troops with drones from Pokrovsk, from Uspanivka, and of course from Velikomikhailovka. That will be the point where serious problems may begin. Up until then, the Russian side should not encounter major obstacles. To move further beyond this point, the Russian army will need access toward the R85 highway. They will either need to force the Volchya River and storm Velikomikhailovka, cutting off AFU units that could otherwise attack Russian troops from the rear, or launch offensives from Malinivka northwards toward the Poltavska fortified zone and then toward Uspanivka. In other words, two options. Either move on Velikomikhailovka or go through Poltavka toward Uspanivka. These moves could relieve pressure and reduce AFU counterstrikes and drone attacks. We will see how the situation develops, But one thing is clear. In the coming days, the villages of Kalinivske, Berezove, and Stepov will almost certainly fall under Russian control as part of the Vostok grouping. Problems may also arise for the AFU in Novovanivka and Novohrihorivka. These small villages, located away from the main fortified zones of Uspenivka, Poltavska, Veliko-Mikhailivka, Pokrovska, and Huliai-Pol, will likely collapse. How events unfold beyond that will depend on the skill of the Vostok grouping and its command. Now let's move on to the western Donetsk direction. Let me remind you that during August, the AFU carried out a series of fairly successful counterattacks by crossing the Volchya River. Those counterattacks involved the 67th AFU Brigade, the 37th Marine Brigade, the 55th Heavy Mechanized, as well as the 33rd and 141st. All of these tried to counterattack across the Volchya toward Podubna and Tolstoy. At that time, we updated the maps and explained that Ukraine was attempting to slow the Zaporizhzhia offensive. Those strikes were contained and repelled by the Russian side, and today reports indicate that by the beginning of September 13, 2025, the Russian armed forces had fully restored control over the territories lost during that Ukrainian counter-offensive. Perhaps some southwestern parts of Iskra or Andriivka, Klevtsovo remain under AFU control or in a grey zone, but this no longer changes the overall picture. The statements of the Russian Ministry of Defense are thus confirmed. A few days ago, the Russian MOD reported that the Vostok grouping had fully cleared the entire Donetsk region within its area of responsibility, from Zeleny High southwards toward Novopil and Zelenopol. That has been confirmed, and today it is again corroborated by independent sources. On the other hand, footage has emerged of Ukrainian counterattacks in Dnipropetrovsk region toward the settlement of Filia. Today, objective control footage showed the 425th AFU Assault Regiment recapturing positions in Filia, forcing the Russian army to retreat. The footage shows Ukrainian soldiers raising their flag in the central and northeastern part. Apparently, the Russian side failed to hold the bridgehead on the Ukrainian side of the Novopavlivka sector and was forced to pull back until a more favorable moment. Next, we move to the Pokrovsk sector of the front, the very sector that is largely responsible for the near-total collapse of AFU defenses in the Zaporizhzhia, Kostyantynivka, Lyman, and even Kupiansk sectors. It is here that Sirsky is now concentrating Ukraine's most powerful and combat-ready grouping, pulling units from almost every other front just to hold Pokrovsk. Today, reports are spreading that Zelensky, or perhaps someone from his office, maybe Yermak, said that if the Pokrovsk agglomeration is lost, then all brigade commanders, the general staff, and everyone else will be dismissed, and perhaps even worse, maybe reassigned to the 425th Skala Assault Regiment to fight on the front lines. For this reason, Sirsky personally arrived at Pokrovsk to command the defense and prevent a collapse. Here, the Ukrainian side is trying in every way to counterattack to regain lost positions. The fiercest fighting is currently unfolding around the Shakov pocket. Over the past several days, map updates from neutral and pro-Ukrainian cartographers have shown gains for the AFU, and today the first footage emerged from the settlement of Vladimirovka. A few weeks ago, the Russian Ministry of Defense itself reported full control over this settlement. But now, reliable pro-Russian sources have published video footage showing Russian aviation leveling Vladimirovka with relentless strikes using FAB bombs and aircraft. Some of these strikes were geolocated in the central part of the settlement. Based on this footage, we can conclude that neutral and pro-Ukrainian cartographers were indeed closer to the reality. The Ukrainian side had managed to counterattack and at least partially regain Vladimirovka. At present, the Russian army is trying to stabilize the front line and contain any breakthrough with the use of air power. Moreover, neutral cartographers yesterday reported AFU advances southeast of the village of Sofiivka. However, this information was not confirmed today. Footage from objective control was released, showing that these tree lines and fortified areas remain under the control of the Russian army. Here we can see Ukrainian forces dropping explosives on Russian armed forces positions along this tree line, so part of the territory has been recolored back. But in any case, it is possible that both recolorings, whether in favor of the Russian armed forces or the Ukrainian armed forces, are not entirely appropriate, because right now a head-on battle is underway here, a fight for the initiative. The Ukrainian side under Sirsky is trying to cut off the salient of this breakthrough to prevent the encirclement of the Pokrovsk agglomeration. The Russian side is moving forward systematically, gradually and calmly toward its objectives. So in reality, the most serious developments are happening right here. This is essentially a decisive battle. Possibly not only the decisive battle of 2025 or of the summer-autumn campaign, but by all appearances, the decisive battle of the entire special military operation. The Sharkovo pocket, the Pokrovsk agglomeration, Dobropilya, whoever manages to achieve gains here, improve their positions, break through defenses, or stabilize the situation will, in fact, likely dictate the conditions for the end of 2025 and perhaps the beginning of 2026. In general, everything may depend on this. Whether the war, the special military operation, ends this year, or whether it drags on for an indefinite number of years, possibly even decades. Now we move toward Kostyantynivka. Today, from the Kostyantynivka agglomeration, undeniable evidence has arrived showing that the Russian army has indeed entered the city from the southeast. Russian forces are strengthening their positions, attempting to entrench themselves in the darker areas of Kostyantynivka. And overall, it appears that the entire southern and southeastern defensive line has collapsed under the pressure of Russian units advancing from Predtekine and Oleksandr Shultin. Let's take a look at how the situation developed in this area. This is how the map looked on September 9-10. That was exactly the moment when, based on the number of geolocations, we concluded that the Russian storming had begun. The large-scale offensive toward Kostyantynivka aimed at finally collapsing the southeastern pocket, reaching the outskirts of the city, entering and consolidating. Note the large number of geolocations, all aligned along the main possible attack routes, from Klebenbyk, from Oleksandr Shultin, from Bakhmut. All lines are under pressure. The armed forces of Ukraine are pulling equipment and infantry as close to the front as possible, seeing that movement has begun. And indeed, the movement has started. Russian forces destroyed a large amount of equipment. At least, that's what objective control footage shows. And once the equipment was knocked out, assault operations began. But first and foremost, the Russian army focused on the pocket southeast of Oleksandr Shultin Predtekine. By September 11th, reports indicated that Russian advance units managed to seize powerful networks of strongpoints, trenches and dugouts that came under Russian control. This is even confirmed by objective control footage published by the Ukrainian side itself, showing strikes on Russian equipment, infantry fighting vehicles, and so on. These images suggest that we are no longer talking about isolated saboteurs sneaking between bushes, trees, and villages. Here we can clearly see heavy equipment, an unmistakable sign that the attack was carried out not just by saboteurs, but by regular army and assault units. For example, there are some episodes directly from within Kostyantynivka itself, more precisely its southeastern Daka zone. One Ukrainian drone strike hit this building. Based on this footage, we can conclude that Russian forces have indeed entrenched themselves in the southeastern part of the Kostyantynivka agglomeration and continue their offensive. The entire southeastern flank has apparently collapsed. The southern flank, from Ivanopilya to Pleshcheyevka, is also on the brink of collapse, with reports of new Russian advances there. Summing up, within 2 to 3 days, depending of course on the tempo and success of operations, the situation could develop in such a way that this entire area, all positions along the Red Line, will already be under Russian control. And that would mean, once again, that 6% of the entire city of Kostyantynivka, along with its agglomeration, would be under Russian control. Next, we move to the Siversk sector. Today there are only a few geolocations from this area. Strikes are being carried out. Artillery, flamethrower systems, aviation, targeting Ukrainian FPV drone operators in the area of Dnipro. But overall, the focus here is still on destroying as much equipment and as many FPV drone operators as possible, and only afterward, after this preliminary clearing, beginning ground movement. On the Lyman front, several more tree lines and fields came under the control of Russian forces near Kolodyazy, Serebryanka, and Shandryholov. The Russian army is gradually closing in on the village of Stavki. There is still no information from the direction of Zaporizhzhia, though we are expecting official reports any day now about its full capture. Nor is there yet news from Dnipro, but overall, the situation here is the same. Just like in the zone of responsibility of the Vostok grouping, the Zapad grouping is steadily day by day pushing forward. Now we move toward Kupiansk. Today, Ukrainian channels and sources are sounding the alarm and panicking because another tunnel was discovered, through which Russian forces are bringing infantry toward Kupiansk unhindered. Here is the very opening of the tunnel, with Russian soldiers emerging. Sources claim its length may reach 6 to 7 kilometers. It reportedly starts near Lyman and Siversk, or Sinkivka, and runs under the Oskil River toward the northern outskirts of Kupiansk. Step by step, Russian troops are using this tunnel to reinforce their battle lines. This is yet another problem for the Ukrainian armed forces, indicating that an operational crisis is developing here. Some local sources even report that the Ukrainian command has essentially abandoned the Kupiansk direction and that the town is being prepared for surrender. The only task now for Ukrainian units is to buy time, a day, a week, 2 weeks. That may be enough to stabilize the situation on the Dobropilya front and extinguish that fire. Only then might resources and reserves be freed to redeploy back to Kupiansk in an effort to stabilize the front. But this time on the western bank of the Oskil River, beyond Kupiansk's urban boundaries. And that's all for now, dear friends. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to the channel, leave your likes, and all the best to you.